So I didn't think I'd be talking about Sly Cooper again so soon after my video in January, much less to discuss something on the negative side, but here we are. As many are beginning to take notice of, the PS Classics versions of Sly 2, Band of Thieves, and Sly 3, Honor Among Thieves received patches this last week, and in the case of Sly 2, there's actually a pretty disappointing removal wrapped in. Now, I'll admit, I'm definitely kicking myself at this point for not considering this when I made my video comparing the Sly Classics to the Sly Collection, because while these PS Classics are just sort of simple emulation ports, they typically haven't been abandoned right after they hit the store. Sly 1, for instance, got a pretty significant patch to tighten up the visuals back late in 2024, and Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier launched with a game-breaking crash upon reaching the second hub that was unavoidable, and naturally that got resolved in a patch. Conversely, the patch Sly 2 ended up receiving is quite frustrating, and since I spent a whole section of my comparison praising an aspect of the game that has now been removed, I feel I have to address the changes and set the record straight, so let's dive right into the details and then what your options are, because I'm happy to report that not all hope is lost. Really quickly though, let's get out of the way the new addition the patch provided and the first thing people noticed when the update took effect. In the emulation menu accessed by hitting the options button, there is now an option to select from a variety of aspect ratios. This lets you determine how much of the screen space the game is going to take, including one to have the game fit the entire TV. But don't be fooled, this is far from a dedicated widescreen or anything. Unlike the Sly Collection, which had actual widescreen where you got to see more of the game, these options are basically to determine how stretched you'd like the picture quality to be. And yeah, from where I'm sitting, none of these options look particularly appealing. Of course, I'm never going to push back against more options in games, but I can only ever really see myself using the default look the game opens with, since it looks the best while being the least distracting. This was added to Sly 3 as well. As I mentioned before, this patch applies to both games, so I suppose you could take a look for yourself when starting them up and making a call for which option you think looks the best, but overall to me it's a pretty insignificant addition. But now on to our main topic, what was removed. In my original comparison video, I spent a not insignificant amount of time hyping up the PS Classic emulation of Sly 2 specifically due to the seemingly entirely new feature of being able to skip dialogue and cutscenes. Only Sly 2 has enabled a cutscene skip for all manner of scenes. By hitting the start button equivalent, dialogue and cutscenes can now be skipped right over. The only time this doesn't seem to work is in scenes with title cards, like when Murray crashes through the ceiling in Cairo, but even then, right afterwards, you can skip right over the rest of his dialogue. This is a huge game changer, both for casual players and I'd have to assume speedrunning as well. To recap, those familiar with the Sly games know that they are incredibly story and character focused, and thus each game spends a lot of time on character interactions, mainly through objective briefings. These moments are rarely short and never skippable. On a first playthrough though, players are unlikely to notice this since the dialogue is very well written and snappy, and unlike other contemporaries with this issue, these games almost never force you to rewatch scenes, even in the event of death or retrying. Still, over the years, complaints have been levied at the Sly series for having just so much unskippable dialogue. Because these games are beloved, and on a repeat playthrough, the time the player is interrupted really adds up. I said it before, and I'll say it again. You're looking at all objective briefings, which occur at the beginning of, and even sometimes additionally during every mission, all mission explanation slideshows, all in-person character dialogue, and all chapter intro and outro cinematics. The ability to skip over some of this stuff may seem arbitrary to some, and while I'll concede that yes, if I'm doing a casual replay of Sly 2, then there are going to be scenes that I no doubt want to see again, I'm going to have to be brave here when I say that maybe I don't want to sit through not one, not two, but three forced dialogue exchanges at the start of the Steal Rubies Off Elephants mission, for example. No, really, I'm opening up to you here. Maybe I'd prefer to skip the part where Bentley explains how to pickpocket for the first time, or the numerous other instances of tutorial dialogue in these games. Do you know what I mean? Not every scene is essential viewing on a repeat playthrough. Far from it. I also discussed how Sly 2 is the only game in the series that does not allow for mission replays at all, so the only way to get back around to a later moment in the game is to queue up a new game and replay up to that point. Even if you use cheat codes to skip to later chapters, unless you're itching to replay a recon mission, you will undoubtedly have other content to get through, so being able to skip scenes certainly speeds up the process for what it's worth. These are just some of the reasons why ultimately it was so upsetting to learn last week that the new patch removed the option to skip these scenes. And yes, it is an option. As I explained before with the aspect ratio selection, I will never reject the inclusion of more options, regardless of whether I personally will utilize them. Getting this super useful new feature and then having it ripped away, it hurt. It's also partially the principle of the situation, because while yes, I had no idea this port would even include such a feature, getting it and then losing it really soured my opinion on this whole thing, especially when this is a sort of power that companies can utilize with digital games. Now in hindsight, maybe this should have been a little less surprising. I even stated in the last video that I was confused as to why it would include such a change when PS Classics are typically very faithful, so now maybe it's a little more likely that the feature was not intended, but damn if it wasn't a great one. Myself and many others likely feel a little silly now, having hoped that this feature would be extended to the other titles at some point, when in reality just a short time later it would be quietly removed itself. There has also been talk amongst the fans about how maybe the unnatural nature of the skipping may have led to some soft locks or negative side effects, but I've yet to experience anything of that nature myself, nor have I heard yet of a player-specific account of that happening, so I'm not entirely sure. One thing I can confirm is that both new and returning players alike have reported experiencing that pretty crazy laser redirection glitch that we talked about before that impacts your percentage completion and completely distorts your Chapter 7 progress, but that glitch remains uncorrected in the new patch, so overall I feel it's more likely that the cutscene skip was removed on the grounds of it being unintended and or unfaithful to the original PS2 release. But if I'm being honest, that's a pretty lame reason to correct it when it seemed to be so well received, so who really knows? We'll likely never get confirmation from Sony one way or the other. So what do we do about this? Well, I made this video, so what are you gonna do? Because I already did my part. Nah, I'm just kidding. As the title of this video states, there is a way to fix this issue and revert the game back to its original 1.0 version. I was initially pretty upset because when I attempted to find leads on how to revert digital PS5 titles, no solutions really turned up. But only after a couple of days did I begin to consider that I'd only explored half of my options. It can be sort of hard to remember at times that PS5 and PS4 are two different consoles, given how low-key the current generation of games has been so far, coupled with the PS5's backwards compatibility with PS4 making them seem somewhat interchangeable for titles that appear on both. However, while PS5 digital titles seemingly have no way to alter, revert, or obtain individual patch versions, PS4 digital titles give us a little more to work with. Purchasing any of the PS Classics right now automatically come with both the PS4 and PS5 versions, so exploiting the PS4 version specifically of Slide 2 in this case is doable seemingly on both consoles, so long as the version is the PS4 version. Without the need for homebrew or jailbreaking or anything like that, an external tool can actually be used to trick your console into downloading a specific version of a digital PS4 game. The software I used was this Rewind PS4, which made for an extremely quick and effortless swap back to the original release of Sly 2. If you simply want to get a game's 1.0 version back on a PS4 console, it's literally just 2 clicks in the Rewind PS4 application, boom boom, and then a quick tweak to your internet connection settings to enter the proxy information provided by the application itself. Then when you go to download the game again from your library or the PlayStation Store, the version that gets downloaded will be the 1.0 version, rather than the new 1.00001 that removed the cutscene skip annoyingly. All you have to do to maintain this is either keep the proxy on when you launch the game going forward, turn your internet connection off when you launch the game, or if you're lazy like me, you can just quickly jump into your downloads and hastily delete the update when it tries to download. Obviously though, if you make a mistake in the game updates, you can just repeat the process rather quickly by deleting the updated version and re-downloading with the active proxy. Now setting it up on PS5 is slightly more complicated, but I'm going to go ahead and link the information page, which includes a guide on how to use it, along with the download link down below. There do seem to be other PS4 alternatives though, like other slightly more complicated tools, or even how maxing out your PS4 storage and attempting to install a game can force it to queue up the 1.0 release, but I figured I'd mainly focus on what was the quickest and easiest. I'm not really going to try to explain in any specific detail because I'm not an expert, so I know I'm just going to feel like an idiot if I try to get thorough, but if anything that should be a testament to how easy this is to set up, since even I could do it. So in conclusion, the new Slide 2 patch stinks, and you should do anything in your power to get rid of it. If you have a computer and like 10 spare minutes, then I highly recommend getting back to the original release when you next get the inkling to replay the game. I stand by my statements in the original comparison video that this feature, whether intended or not, is a game changer for longtime fans like myself that love to return to the game frequently to re-experience the story or to refine speedruns, which we didn't even dive into but is obviously another substantial reason as to why this is such a big deal. I will confirm though that even with the feature removed, the Sly Classic ports are still in my opinion the definitive way to experience the trilogy, so long as you have the means to play them. But if you want more information on that, I highly recommend checking out my original video comparing their differences to the other accessible options. Now if you like this video and want to show some support, do me a solid and check out my last video on Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, where I went through the major arcs of the 2 lead protagonists to illustrate why for some, the story and characters felt stretched thin, left shallow, and undercooked, and was just weird in general. Not sure how much crossover Sly and Yakuza have as far as their fan bases go, but I will say that they are both excellent franchises and heavily revolve around crime, so there's that at least. If you want, you could just comment something along the lines of, I've never played any of these goofy shirtless men games, but I suppose unchallenged and to the uninformed, your points have merit despite your obsessiveness overall being a little embarrassing, or something like that. I'm kidding. In the meantime, I hope you stick around for whatever I'm cooking up next. Until then though, have a great rest of your day, and stay safe.